some cars don't just get old. They are still in the back of people's minds in America, waiting for someone to find them, like someone might find an old picture in a drawer they haven't opened in years. The Buick Special from 1954 is one of those quiet ghosts, the kind that steps forward with a soft nod from a different time, not a roar. Imagine a quiet summer morning in the middle of the 1900s in the United States. Lawns that have been cut, pavement that has been warmed by the sun, and a Buick slowly pulling out of a driveway with the steady confidence that only post-war steel can give. That year, Buick wasn't looking for flash or style. They were looking for something easier. A working man could afford dignity, honesty, and a sense of pride without having to apologize. And under that calm intention, the '54 Special came out of Detroit's hands like a bridge between what America had been and what it was about to become. You need to go back to the time and place that made the 1954 Buick Special important to understand why it was a world where America was finally able to relax after years of war bonds, ration books, and quiet strength. The country was getting back to normal by the early 1950s. New highways were cutting through farmland. Suburbs were growing like new paint on a blank wall. And neon lights lit up Saturday nights at corner diners where Buicks, Chevrolets, and Fords stood like proud sentinels of a new, confident era. Buick had always been the gentleman of General Motors. It was a respectable, polished car that a man could wear his best hat in, even on regular days. But the market was changing right under Detroit's feet. Families with younger children were buying their first new cars. Veterans who came back home now had jobs, houses, and kids. They wanted cars that looked modern, made them feel good about themselves, and were a reward for years of hard work. Buick knew that the old formula wouldn't last much longer. The 1954 Special turned into a quiet revolution. The designers carefully and purposefully shaped its body. The fenders were smoother and cleaner, with just the right amount of curve to catch the morning sun without drawing too much attention. The grille, which had the famous Buick toothwork, made the car look confident without being aggressive. You could see one from half a block away, not because it was eye-catching, but because it looked like a skilled craftsman carrying his tools. Steady, planned, and sure. The straight 8 Fireball lived under the hood, a long-stroke engine that was known for being smooth rather than powerful. It didn't jump, it opened up. The car didn't move forward when you pressed the gas pedal. It moved smoothly as a baritone cleared his throat. This was the engine that Buick used to get through the years before the war. It had been improved over and over again until it had a kind of mechanical grace that modern drivers don't see very often. Then there was Dino Flow. Back then, critics said it was too slow to change and too soft on the line, but people who drove Buicks knew what it was for. Dynaflow wasn't made for drag strips. It was made to go a long way in America. There were no jolts or gear changes you could feel. There was just one smooth, velvety flow of power from the driveway to the open road. Older men who got behind the wheel felt something familiar: steadiness, predictability, and a sense of quiet control. The Buick Special felt like a living room on wheels. There were wide benches covered in strong fabrics or soft vinyl, thick carpeting on the floor, and chrome trim that reflected the soft green glow of the instrument panel at night. The dashboard curved gently around the driver, not enclosing him but guiding his hand from switch to lever in a way that only engineers from the middle of the century seemed to understand. There were no cheap shortcuts or wasted space. The knobs even felt heavy, as if the designers thought that a man should have tactile dignity in every little thing. And this is the truth that most people forget. The Special wasn't supposed to be showy. That was saved for the Super and Roadmaster by Buick. The Special was the way for everyone to get into the brand. A car for the machinist, the shop foreman, or the small business owner who wanted something better than a Chevrolet, but didn't need all the chrome that comes with a Cadillac. Dealers loved selling it because it made people feel like they were getting something better without going overboard. By the end of 1954, the Special was a common sight in towns from Ohio to Oregon. It took newlyweds to their first apartments. It carried wood for weekend projects. It took families to church on Sundays and teens to drive-ins on hot July nights. It wasn't a big deal in the car world. It was a friend who was always there and never complained. But there was a quiet tension brewing under all that popularity. No one thought the industry would change as quickly as it did. New technology was right around the corner. V8 engines were rising like a wave. And even though the '54 Special stood out, it would soon be stuck between two worlds, one that was fading and one that was rushing towards the horizon. By 1955, the world around the Special changed very quickly. Buick showed off its first modern V8, a short-stroke engine that changed the way drivers thought a car should feel. Acceleration got sharper, styling got louder and bolder, with more chrome and brighter colors. The tail fin age was moving, and the United States wanted a show. In the middle of that rising wave, the '54 Special calm, measured, and dignified voice suddenly felt like the last quiet voice in a room that had decided to shout. Owners kept driving them, but collectors, fans, and even Buick itself started to celebrate the flashier years that came after. The '55 Special and the famous '57 models were the stars of the show. And the 1954 slipped through the cracks, not because of its flaws, but because of the sheer force of the time that came before it. By the middle of the 1960s, when muscle cars were all the rage and small imports were starting to show up in American driveways, the '54 Special was no longer in style. Its straight 8, which used to be praised for being smooth and reliable, now seemed like something from a time when things were slower. A lot of them were traded in, turned into steel, or pushed behind barns, where tall grass slowly grew around their tires. They didn't go away in a big way. One quiet engine at a time, they just faded away. But a few survived, not because collectors wanted to buy them, but because men had made the Buick a part of their lives. Walter Briggs, a retired Navy electrician from eastern Pennsylvania, was one of these men. He bought his '54 Special used in 1958, due white and Gulf turquoise, and the bench seats are smooth from years of use. He drove his newborn daughter home from the hospital in it, used it to get to work during winter storms, and took long summer trips down two-lane roads that went through farmland and old mill towns. Walter was the kind of person who took care of everything he owned with quiet dedication. The Buick lived in his workshop with him like a trusted friend. It smelled like oil, sawdust, and pipe tobacco. On Saturday mornings, his neighbors would watch him polish the chrome until it shined like a mirror. He didn't keep the car because it was worth a lot. He kept it because it held his years, because every scratch had a story, and every mile held someone he loved. Walter's daughter got the Buick when he died in the early 1990s. She didn't want to change anything about it, so she didn't drive it. She kept it in the garage under a canvas cover and would sometimes lift a corner to run her hand along the fender, like she was saying hello to an old friend of her father's. And there it stayed, kept safe by love instead of repair. There weren't many stories like Walter's, but they weren't the only ones. A few '54 Specials survived across the country because one man, usually someone who had worked hard to build a stable life, chose loyalty over novelty. The car was important to him. It was a promise he made to himself or a time in his life that was too important to give up. But these exceptions only prove the point. By the 1980s, the 1954 Buick Special was almost completely gone. Not famous enough to draw crowds, not rare enough to get high prices, and not flashy enough to be on magazine covers. Even historians of cars only talked about it in passing, mostly because it was the end of Buick's long, straight 8 tradition. But when one shows up today, behind a falling barn door, under a dusty tarp in a forgotten garage, or proudly parked at a small town car show, it feels like talking about a ghost that won't go away. The lines, the stance, the quiet dignity. They whisper about an America that knew how to value the steady over the exciting. It wasn't a tragedy that the '54 Special went missing. It faded slowly, like drifting into the past. But like everything else that goes away, it left a shape, a shadow, and a soft echo. When you stand in front of a 1954 Buick Special today, whether the paint still shines like it did on that first summer morning, or the car is old and dusty with peeling lacquer, you feel something different than you do with most mid-century cars. You can feel the weight of a time in American history when people who made things were still humble, when engineers built things with a purpose instead of just to look good, and when the value of a car was based on how well it carried a family over the years instead of how fast it could go down the highway. Most cars from the 1950s are all about too much chrome and too much horsepower. The 1954 Special, on the other hand, tells a softer story. The last chapter in Buick's straight 8 story. The last breath before Detroit rushed into the loud, colorful years that would define mid-century driving. This car was in the middle of two Americas, one shaped by patience, routine, and stability after the war, and the other eager for flash, speed, and the promise of a brighter, louder tomorrow. When you get close to one, the details start to come out like pages in an old family photo album. The wide hood sticks out, as if it's leading the way. Before fashion and tail fins took over, the fenders had a nice curve. The instrument panel glowed softly at dusk, casting a warm green halo over the cabin. These little things weren't meant to wow. They were made to last, and maybe that's why the men who owned these cars always remembered them. You couldn't throw away a Buick like this. It wasn't just a phase, it was a part of the house. Like the sound of the kitchen clock or the screen door squeaking. Long after the V8 craze swept the country, long after magazines stopped running ads for family sedans that were easy to drive, the '54 Special stayed quietly loyal. Even now, when you start it up and the straight 8 settles into its elegant, velvety idle, you can almost hear the echoes of a country getting back on its feet after hard times, steady hands, honest work, and the hope that the road ahead would always lead to something better. That's why the eye tells these stories. Cars like the '54 Special don't last because they are rare or famous. They last because people remember them, based on what men who drove it to their first jobs remember, on the stories of fathers who drove theirs so much that it felt like a member of the family, on the sons who sat in the passenger seat and watched the world change year after year, but the Buick never did. So the question is, where does your story fit in with these? Maybe your dad had a glacier blue stripped of options with the straight 8 that never complained. You might have learned to drive one on a gravel road behind your grandfather's farm. You might not have seen a '54 Special in years, but the memory is still there, like a warmth you can't quite put your finger on. Or maybe you have one in your garage right now, waiting for the day you give it back its voice. This is the place to share your story if the '54 Special has had any effect on your life. Put your memory next to the others. Please let the story go on. These machines don't last because of metal and bolts. They last because people remember them and keep them going. And if this story made you feel something, like the sound of gravel under wide white walls or the smell of warm vinyl on a summer night, then stay close to this archive. There are more stories to be told in dark barns and quiet garages, more ghosts of American steel that need to be seen again. Speak up. Remember what happened. Help keep the heartbeat of the machines that once took us through the most hopeful miles of the American century,